I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. I've got to be upfront with you here. Hosting a program covering careers, I've come to realize the hours of conversations I've had, there are always new angles to cover when speaking with someone. And also, covering one profession and one person does not, let me repeat, does not fully give you a 100% accurate look at a job. And take today's focus and guess. I've got an episode covering the work of a lawyer. And to be straight up, I've covered 2 other lawyers. However, each have been different, ranging from a criminal prosecutor to a corporate in-house lawyer to today's guest, who, by the way, is a highly regarded, highly skilled government litigator who works for the province of Canada's British Columbia. And she has a ton of insights to share, ranging from unique challenges she faces, the rewards of the profession, to what she feels it takes to succeed, plus a lot more. So if you have any inkling or interest in becoming a lawyer, listen in, because I guarantee you'll come away better informed and better equipped to evaluate this work. All right, well, let me more formally introduce her to you, and we can get going. Katherine "Kat" Reilly has been practicing law for 17 years and is currently legal counsel with the Canadian province of British Columbia's Ministry of Attorney General. And Katherine is an experienced litigator and a skilled advocate. She has appeared at all levels of court in Canada. As the lead of her office's Injunctions Group, she often advises on high-profile and complex litigation matters that involve court injunctions and pressing matters of public concern. Now, before joining government, Katherine worked in private practice in Vancouver. And for over 14 years, she was a corporate commercial litigator with a national business law firm. There, she acted for businesses large and small, including financial institutions, technology companies, and construction companies, among others. And she handled disputes in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And she started at the firm in 2006 as an articled student, progressed to an associate position, and then became partner in 2014. Now, Katherine eventually decided to dip her toe in the world of public and constitutional law. Working as a lawyer for the government did not come with the same grueling hours as private practice, and the change of pace has given Katherine the freedom to explore other areas of interest and live life in a different and extremely fulfilling way than the typical private practice gig allows. So, with all of this noted, here's my conversation with Katherine Reilly. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Katherine?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Really excited for this conversation. You know, I think that the work that you do and what it represents is of great interest to a lot of young people. So I'm quite keen to share it all today. So, with that in mind, really quickly to get this out of the way, do you prefer Katherine or Kat?
You know what? For now, just call me Kat. I used to go by Katherine mostly in my job, but that was when I was more junior and cared more about what people thought. So Kat works for me if that works for you.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. All right. Well, I do have this first segment lined up for us today, something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my listeners know, it's a segment where I just read off the definition of something related to the guests or their work. And I went with this term, litigation strategy. So let me just read that off, and then perhaps afterwards you could comment. Sound okay?
Sounds great.
All right, so here we go. Litigation strategy. Litigation strategy is the process by which counsel for one party to a lawsuit intends to integrate their actions with anticipated events and reactions to achieve the overarching goal of the litigation. The strategic goal may be the verdict or the damages or sentence awarded in the case. Alternatively, in the case of impact litigation, also known as strategic litigation, the goal may be more far reaching, such as setting legal precedent, affecting consumer safety standards, or reshaping the public's perception of a societal issue. A bit wordy and a bit of a practical look at it all, but all the same, I'd love to hear your initial take on it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that rings true. Some of it, I think, rings true more depending on what area of law you practice in. So, for example, I do not work in the sort of world of strategic litigation, which, might be more the areas that sort of advocacy type organizations are involved in. But in terms of the sort of like strategy piece, just sort of straight up legal strategy, incorporating that into, how you're planning and executing steps on a file. That's very much a part of what I do as a litigator in particular. I have a feeling solicitors probably also do that, but I can't speak to that specifically. But the litigation side of things, because it's so, it's an adversarial process, we are kind of going into battle. So there's a lot of strategy, and you have to be a tactician, really, in a lot of ways. So there's strategy that comes in kind of in every move. You're sort of playing a long-term chess game in a lot of ways and trying to anticipate what the other side's moves might be and how that might impact what your moves are. If you make a certain move in a certain direction, are you showing too much of your hand? Are you overcommitting? Are you going to weaken your position or lose some of your leverage? And how might that impact your options or your strategy going forward? So there is very much, a lot of that in basically everything I do. And there's the macro scale, sort of what steps do we take? What kind of big moves are we going to make on this litigation? Are we going to bring this kind of application? Are we going to, attempt to like strike this or bring this to trial? And then there's, it goes right down to like a micro level as well, where you're having to be strategic about even small things sometimes that you say in an email to opposing counsel. So it's yeah, it can be sort of like I say, the broader scale or down to the very sort of minute aspects
Yeah,
as well.
it sounds like it. And I think like for
Mhm.
those who are looking in at the profession who just have like a working knowledge of what it's all about, would assume that that would be a big part of it. I'm sure you did as well when you got into it. But once you
Mhm.
actually entered into the field, were you kind of taken aback by the level at which, this aspect really does influence the way you, carry out your actions and actually, do the work itself?
I think that's fair to say, yes, because there are like just the extent to which it infiltrates kind of every aspect of the job in ways. You almost can't let your guard down at times. It makes it hard to, there's the old saying from Shakespeare, like, basically be adversaries and fight mightily and then retire as friends and be friends after the fact. And it's sometimes tricky because everyone's sort of on their game all the time. So it certainly was surprising, I think, in that aspect. And there are times, especially I remember as a junior lawyer, where I realized things that I didn't anticipate going into law, which was that I was having to perform and be strategic in a sense of like very thoughtful and very deliberate about my actions, my words to my client, who was at the time when I was a corporate lawyer paying a lot of money for my services, hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour, and trusting me to get them out of whatever pickle they were in. And also how I was presenting myself to opposing counsel, because of course there was a negotiation type relationship there, an adversarial. How I was presenting myself to the judge, how I was presenting myself to my colleagues back at the office, whether I was exhibiting confidence, whether I was, so it kind of like you can go down a rabbit hole pretty quick and sort of how many levels and layers that can infiltrate your sort of day to day, which can make it very exhausting, actually. It's a tiring job for that reason, because you're sort of always thinking about who's my audience right now and what do I need to be communicating to them. And is this going to hurt? Is this going to help? Is this going to change things? So there's a lot of calculations going on a lot of the
It
time.
sounds like it. And that's kind of what I was picking up on when you initially, were sharing your insights on that definition. You assume that that's a big part of the work, again, from the outside looking in, but to hear the way that, you just outlined it there, yeah, I can imagine that being fairly stressful, especially for somebody when in a junior position who's just starting out. A bit of overwhelm could be involved with it. But yeah, I guess over time you learn, and it's like anything else, you pick up, the important sort of rules of engagement with
Mhm.
others, and you
For
figure out,
sure.
you manage, and how to go about doing the work itself.
You do. I will say though, for anyone thinking about going into this line of work, the first, 2 or 3 years are by far the most challenging, by far. You're sort of on an exponential learning curve, not only about the subject matter, what you're doing, but how you're doing it and how you're relating to other people. And because everything you do is so new, you're encountering a new situation every day, pretty much. And now when I encounter new situations, A, they don't phase me as much. And B, I can draw on some of my prior experience to be like, okay, I haven't seen this before, but I've seen something like it. So I've got an idea how to deal with this. So the level of stress and overwhelm drops significantly sort of with each year of practice, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, this might be an opportune time to learn a little bit more about what you do by stepping into this other segment here, A Day in the Life. And as it sounds, as legal counsel for the Canadian province of British Columbia and the Ministry of Attorney General, I think listeners would love to hear, like, what does a typical day or maybe a typical week look like for you?
hmm it's a great question, and it probably looking at a typical week is a bit more representative because the days, and this is one of the great parts of the job actually, is that the days can be quite varied. So like today, I'm coming you from, I'm having a work from home day. I've mainly been on, meetings and phone calls today. I'm doing some writing. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of reading. And there's a fair amount of talking, I would say, in this job. When you're more junior in the profession, you do more of the reading and research and that sort of thing. And I say the more senior you get, you probably do more of the talking and, to the court and to your clients and that sort of thing. So a typical day could involve for me, meetings with colleagues who are working with me on a file, like team members who are supporting me on the file. I'm not always the most senior, like team lead on a file, but typically am at this stage of my career. It will also be meetings with clients, updating them, getting information from them, figuring out what we need to do, what are their needs and goals, and how does that impact the steps that I need to take as their representative on a particular piece of litigation, emailing with or writing to or on the phone with opposing counsel, because that's who you're dealing with. And unless it's a really, really, really big file that you've got lots of files on the go. So you're dealing with a lot of different matters. So it's like I have to call opposing counsel on that file and I have to get back to the client because they had a question about that. And so and so is waiting to hear from me on this other thing. So it's a lot of sort of bouncing between and really multitasking and kind of balancing a lot of competing demands and being able to prioritize really what is the most significant right now. What do I need to devote my attention to? And then because there will also be days and weeks where it's like, well, I'm in court right now, and that takes all of my attention when I'm in court, especially running a trial where it's like you really need to be firing on all cylinders when you're in trial. It's like the big game because you've got live witnesses who are going to say things you didn't expect. You've got the judge, you've got, all these various pieces, and it can be very all consuming. So having the work from home days and the office days where you're writing a legal argument or strategizing with a legal argument or, chatting with your colleagues, trying to figure your way through something, for me provides a really nice balance because there are some fields of law where you're only in your office ever. And there are some fields of law like criminal law where you're basically always in court. And for me, this works. Like it's kind of a nice balance. I get to do both. So every week probably looks a bit different, but it's usually some combination of all those things.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking with so many different types of professionals across industries, it's that notion of variety within the work that I think really does help buffer, well, I
Mhm.
guess it like presents new opportunities for people to explore different ways of interacting with others in their work and conducting their work itself, and then that I think can add a layer of fulfillment to it all. It's the mundane that kind of gets people. And it sounds like to me that you don't have that necessarily within your work.
I certainly do not, and partly it's because I've sought out the extra layer of variety I think that I have, because there are certainly areas of law, there are people who run sort of motor vehicle cases or foreclosures or certain types of things that are very formulaic in a way. That's not necessarily the best word to use for that, but get what I mean. Sort of there's a much more of a predictable structure to it. So there are some areas of law, and that's actually one thing I think people can there's lots of impressions and assumptions about what, law is and what lawyering looks like. And it really can be so many different things. There's so many ways that it can look to practice law. There's really not one way that it looks. And I think you've actually probably interviewed lawyers prior to me on this show, which I think is great because it really there isn't one lawyer who can sort of say, this is what it's like to be a lawyer.
That's exactly it. I have this other question too, in researching for this talk, some information that you shared across, which is, you used to work for a private enterprise and then you moved to government. And part of the reason at the time was like the less grueling hours that the government offered as opposed to working within a private practice. And I think that would also be insightful for listeners to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, I started out in private practice. I had a really great run there. I certainly have nothing bad to say about the private firm and the big firm lifestyle or the work that they do. I worked in one of the largest Canadian business law firms for 15 years. I had some great colleagues, did very high level, very interesting work, and it was grueling at times. There was a high expectations, sort of a high performance level that was required most, if not all the time. And then at times it gets sort of extra kind of inflated. So it certainly took a toll on me. I think it takes a toll on lots of people. Some people are less inclined to do something about it. And some people I think are truly happy and truly thrive in that environment for the long term. I thrived in that environment for the medium term, I think. And for me it was worth shifting gears and trying something else out. I also sort of felt it wasn't a very deliberate. I think some people do make a very deliberate, I want a lifestyle change. I'm going to switch to this, different kind of job or different kind of aspect of career. For me, it was just actually feeling like I was ready for a change. And because of where I live in British Columbia, there's a lot of government jobs here, and some of the most interesting law jobs in my particular city and region are working for the provincial government. So for me, it was a trade-off in the sense that I don't have to work as long hours. I still do have to work overtime sometimes. I don't know that any lawyer gets away with no sort of overtime. It's never a straight 9 to 5, 40-hour week, especially as a litigator, because there are court deadlines and hearings and things that come up, and the court will, you know, ask things of you, and it may not be convenient, but you have to do your absolute best to make it happen. So there are things like that that still, crop up. But the trade-off for me is I work fewer hours. I have a 4-year-old daughter. I can pick her up, every day. I definitely saw people in my field when I was in private practice who had a nanny and a night nanny, and like really needed a lot of support to be able to have a family or to really do anything meaningful outside of work. It was very difficult to have any room for anything substantial to exist sort of outside of your work life. Whereas now it's a lot easier to travel and book holidays and actually be on holiday when I'm on holiday instead of just working from a different location.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds like a big life choice to me. And, choosing what
Yeah,
works for you and rebalancing things in ways that make sense for you at the stage of life that you're within and what you're after, I guess, out of a career.
I think that's right because it certainly worked for me for a lot of years. It didn't, I was happy to put in the hours to learn what I was learning, to work with the great people I was working with, get those experiences, that sort of thing. And it's less compatible now with where I'm at. So this works better. And the bonus for me is that I get to work on very, very interesting public law issues that impact the community, the population of our province, in a significant way. So it's very novel, still novel to me. I've only been with the government for 3 years, and it's still novel to see the cases I'm working on and the issues I'm working on in the news regularly. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we could rewind a second here and learn a little bit more about what brought you into law. Like what initially attracted you to the profession?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think I'm the outlier in a lot of respects with this kind of thing, in the sense that I got the idea in my head as like a 11-year-old kid. Like, I think I'd like to be a lawyer one day. Like, what 11-year-old actually like thinks that and then follows through with it? Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
just the super geeks, I guess, like me. I remember somebody, it was like a parent, might have been my sister's like softball practice, something. It was like a parent there who was a lawyer, I think, saw me reading all the time. Because I'd always bring a book with me and said, "Oh, you read so much, you'd be a great lawyer." And I didn't really understand that connection. I thought, oh, okay, maybe I do want to be a lawyer. And I think for me, it was the sort of combination of the sort of intellectual challenge of it, and knowing sort of how challenging a job it can be, and the, for lack of a better word, like the prestige that comes along with it. Like people have respect for lawyers. And I came from a fairly working class family. And so the idea of having, a level of material comfort and a job that people respected and that I felt I was like, as a self-identified sort of smart kid, would be good at and would enjoy. So it was sort of a combination of those things. And then I sort of tested the theory. Before I went to law school, I volunteered with some lawyers to see, because I thought like I really should see what these people do all day before I go and spend a bunch of money on law school. So I volunteered first with a couple of human rights and employment lawyers and attended some hearings with them, took notes and did research and stuff in the summertime. And then I ended up working as a junior legal assistant and a receptionist at a small family law firm. So both super interesting experiences, and great actually in the sense that I got to work around women lawyers too, to see sort of how they had made the profession kind of work for them in their lifestyles.
Well, a couple of things stand out to me there in listening to that is one is, again, like on this program, I speak with so many different individuals. And you're right, it is incredibly rare for somebody to have a vision or an idea, especially in their youth, and to carry it all the way forward and to actually land in that position. That rarely happens. Again, speaking from experience. The second thing is this notion of, aside from having these visions in your youth, actually going out and testing your assumptions, your hypotheses about whether or not this would be good for you, and actually getting in there and volunteering, and as you just outlined, working as well for these, small family practices or whatnot, just to get that feel for it, to find out truly whether or not it's going to align. And I think that again is represents valuable insights for somebody who is interested in the profession. It's one thing to have an interest, but it's another to kind of test it out ahead of time, because you're right. I mean, the time that it requires, especially going through law school, I can only imagine. Like that unto itself, aside from the financial commitments, is a major time commitment, and I'm sure a lot of other things attached to it as well.
Totally. It's no small feat. And a law degree will certainly serve you well, even if you decide not to go into the practice of law. There's lots of things one can do with a law degree. But yeah, it is a fairly, significant endeavor. And I think some people too, when they undertake the study of law, whether if it even if it didn't totally jive with them and they're not really sure they want to practice, they feel obliged to go into practice. And I see a lot of people really hating their law jobs. And I just think it's so unfortunate because you shouldn't have to. There's so many areas of law that you can almost certainly find a niche that does interest you and sort of get your juices flowing. But I feel like I've seen that all too often where they feel stuck in it. So knowing those things, sooner than later, I think is valuable. And yeah, you can take a page out of my, like I say, geeky law junior handbook that test it out. Go do the test drive before you
Yeah,
sign up for the
yeah.
full program.
Yeah, well, it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. On the heels of that previous question, I do have another segment, a Q&A discovery, and I'd like to get a little bit more insight in terms of, I guess, your rise within the profession. Just as a refresher for listeners, you started in private practice at a national firm in 2006 as an articled student, progressed to an associate position, and then became partner in 2014. And to me, that strikes me as like incredibly quick rise. And I have these like media infused sort of ideas or depictions in my head of what this looked like. But I'm sure there's obviously a lot more to that. But all the same, maybe you could share a little bit what has gone into your success, or what went into your success at that time in particular.
Yeah, for sure. It was a sort of, I suppose, a relatively quick rise, although certainly not the quickest. I saw other people. Yeah, there's some people who were on the super fast track. So I think a lot of lawyers are by nature very competitive and have that streak in them. So when you there's a goal that's being presented to you as like, this is the next level you can attain. And it comes with financial benefits. And in reality, part of what I realized is that it never stops. There never stops being a number of hoops to jump through. There's always a next hoop to jump through. So you don't really sort of ever make it to the top without sort of constantly actively doing a lot of work to maintain that level. So I think it was definitely a combination of having that sort of internal drive for sure, being willing to put in the hard work and the long hours. And I will say that it's not, I certainly wouldn't want anyone to leave this episode, thinking like, well, I just have to go and work my butt off and then I'll do it because and I suffered some health consequences as a result, and I saw other people do the same. So it's not like that's the only way to do it or the best way to do it, but it certainly is. The profession certainly rewards people who work very, very hard and very long hours. It's kind of set up. The business of law part is so private practice is unique in that sense because it is a business and you are in, a client service industry. And so if you are quick on your emails and responsive to clients and doing good work, all of those things, that is how you can get ahead and rise up in that, certainly in that aspect of the profession in particular. So less so with the government work, of course.
Right, right. I'd imagine as well, like this notion of being strategic, that strategic nature of it as well, and plotting your course through it. I'm sure that plays a big part. Also, the relationships you're developing and building and maintaining and all of that stuff, I'm sure plays into this as well.
It does. That's actually a really good point because one thing I omitted to mention was that, having those relationships and building relationships with the people that you work with to like sort of get the experience that you want and that you'll need to progress. That's an important aspect because if you don't have those relationships with people in your office and you aren't getting the really good files or the really, the high billing files or the high profile matters, then you're not necessarily going to progress as quickly. Doing that in a way where you can sort of maintain your own personal integrity, I think is important too, and then having those relationships because there are, the saying goes, probably in other professions, not just law, but every decision that's ultimately made about you will be made without you at the table. So having people who are willing to speak up on your behalf and who can say like, Catherine's done great work for me. Like I've seen her work. I've seen this, like clients feel like this about her. I think we should be investing in her. We should be promoting her. We should be doing this. So relationship building and it is a strategic aspect too, but I tried to think of it as more than just that really because it's how you get sort of enjoyment and richness out of the job really as well. If you're, as long as you're not a sociopath, if you want to be there and you like people and you like who you work with, then you're doing it, not just for the strategic reasons, but obviously it does factor in for sure. Yeah.
And I'm not going to be naive enough to think that also like how gender also comes into this, and this might be a bit of a personal question, but all the same, I think it'd be insightful as well. For especially for a lot of women that are looking at the profession who might be, feel intimidated by that aspect of it, or it might represent a black box in that sense, like how that impacts their career progression or the challenges associated with that. And I think it'd be insightful, if you could share a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, happy to. I think it's a really important topic, actually, especially within the profession like law. I will say I think there's been an undeniable sort of, progress and like movement in the right direction in terms of how many women are in private practice, how many women are, lawyers, judges who are at the top of, firms and at the top of the profession. Is it balanced? No, it's not. It's still not balanced. And it's really not even very close to balanced in a lot of ways. Because what you see in the private firm environment is you see lots of women making it into the associate level, very few women making it to the junior partner level, and very, very few women making it to the senior equity partner level. And same could be said actually for, BIPOC persons and people of color, because it's also, significantly underrepresented. But, I'm as a Caucasian woman, I can speak to my experience, which is the gendered experience more. And there are times I think there's a lot of unconscious bias that is still being wrestled with. People that I worked with were great people, and nobody was trying to deny me opportunities or limit my growth or limit my rise at all. People were trying to assist me and support me. I think it's just that there were some invisible ways in which that was difficult. And there would be, whether it's a social occasion or people are playing hockey together or going golfing together or doing things that you're like, well, I didn't get invited to that. So I didn't hear about that opportunity. And now I don't have as strong a relationship with that person. So I'm not going to be their go-to when they have, something really important or really critical. And they're like, who do I trust? Who do I need? The number of times I started to hear by well-meaning, not malintentioned folks, but by senior male lawyers sitting at a table with, maybe a couple senior lawyers, a couple junior lawyers when I was more, mid-level or junior, and hearing a senior male lawyer say to the junior male lawyer at the table, I see so much of myself in you. They never said that to me. They didn't. They probably respected me a lot. They probably liked me. They thought I was good at my job, but they didn't see themselves in me. And I just can't help but wonder how much that impacts. And it, and there's the whole sort of idea of the motherhood penalty, that it's difficult to continue on at the same level without really, if you want to take time away and spend time with your kids, especially when they're young, it's hard to do that and still be perceived as being as committed to your job as you need to be, or as available as you need to be, especially in a very demanding sort of client driven world like private practice. So yeah, it comes up a lot. I think it's very, very subtle. I don't think it's sort of intentional on almost anyone's part. And you see lots of efforts by the firms and by governments, by most legal employers, I think, to, make very deliberate and well-intentioned initiatives towards diversity and equity and inclusion. And they are well-intentioned and they are worth doing. And I think they are, moving the needle, but very slowly, very slowly.
Yeah, I hate to put you on the spot here, but I mean, all the same, what would you attribute your success? Like, clearly, what you achieved, as we just sort of opened up this question, like you broke through all of this. How did you get around some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I made it to partner, but I didn't make it to the top level. So I was never a co-owner of the firm. And that, I think, was because I was starting to feel like, I think I had probably always sort of wondered in my own heart of hearts, like, do I want to be a business owner and part of that? So, but I was able to push through to the level that I did. I was a partner at the firm, and a lot of it is, like, I think some of it is sheer determination and drive. And you have to have the sort of the basic, nuts and bolts there. You have to be smart. You have to be, like, savvy about who's around you and what things you say, not say in front of clients.
Being
And yeah, all
strategic.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of it is really, can you, I'm not gonna lie, like, the words war of attrition got used a lot, because some people would just be like, peace, I'm out. Like, this is too much. This is too crazy. No thanks. No thanks. And that happens a lot. And probably also I was able to rise to the level that I did because I didn't have a child until later, in my late 30s. If I had had a child in my early 30s, I might have made different moves. I might have had different consequences. I might have had fewer opportunities, frankly. So yeah, hate to say it, but that, I think, really does play a role. Like, it is a factor. Absolutely.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. Well, maybe we could dive into, the nuts and bolts of what you're involved in. I understand that you head up your office's Injunctions Group. And for listeners who aren't familiar, injunctions refers to these court orders requiring an individual to do or admit doing a specific action. Something like a restraining order comes to mind. Now, ostensibly, like the job associated with all of that must be intricately layered, complicated, and quite sensitive. And I'm guessing that you're drawing upon a lot of existing base of knowledge, experience to kind of navigate those waters. Because again, it must be a bit of a tricky situation at times, or some of the cases that are presented to you. I'd love to hear about that particular aspect of your work.
Yeah, for sure. Injunctions are, I must be a glutton for punishment, because injunctions are one of the most time sensitive, very charged, can be very time sensitive, very public issues. So it can, they often involve like civil disobedience and public protest, things like that, where people are breaking the law for a good cause, or, whatever reasons they might personally have, but the court will enjoin that conduct and make orders requiring people to stop doing certain things if it is if it is contrary to the law. So they can be very charged. I think that there must be, I think it must just be part of my, like, personality, or my sort of my genetic imprint, that I thrive on this stuff and kind of enjoy these scenarios, because they can be very fast paced, very interesting. They're, like I say, they're important issues. So that gives you also a sense of purpose too. I think I always enjoyed my work in private practice, but doing injunction work in this particular realm is you can really see the impact that your work is having very tangibly, as opposed to, oh, I'm helping a company to get this, to enforce this thing so that their competitor can't compete in an illegal, inappropriate way or something like that. So yeah, so there's that. And injunctions, because their very nature, they are sort of fast paced, and because a situation will arise and then all of a sudden somebody is seeking an injunction and you are getting to court. Most of the time, the court process moves pretty slowly, at least in North America. Injunctions are one of the few instances where the courts can, if they need to, move lightning quick. And you could have hearings on a weekend or, like on almost no notice if you need to, especially if there's people whose well-being or physical safety is at issue. The courts can move very quickly. So yeah, it requires a lot of adrenaline, I think, but then the ability to draw on like the strategic parts, the actual just knowledge parts, the ability to delegate and decide and prioritize like what needs to be done first and what needs to be done now and what needs to be done by me, as opposed to what can I delegate to a team member and what are their skill sets and who would be best suited for different things. And when you're doing all of that, like on under some intense time pressure, yeah, it can be very challenging, very like exhilarating, I think. But and then you have to go talk to a judge about all of it. So
And also, I think it speaks to this point of, again, something you mentioned earlier of the variation within the work. The way you just sort of outlined the work within injunctions, fast paced, highly charged, as opposed to working, say, within a private practice and helping, say, a company, or, there's so many divisions of law, again, as you mentioned earlier, and the pacing at which, that you're moving and the pressures being different across all of them. So it does really sort of pay to learn, I guess, if you're on the outside looking in and you have an interest in this, kind of figuring out what attracts you, what sort of jives with you and your personality, I think would probably be, sage advice, perhaps. Maybe you'd be better to to speak to that point than I am, but I think that's, again, what I'm picking up here from this conversation thus far.
I think that's a very astute observation because there are so many ways to practice law and ways in which one can practice law. Looking at the ways that suit you most, like what drives you as an individual, what pulls you, is it getting into some really intricate intellectual subjects in a slower paced manner? And maybe tax law is the way to go because there can be some very complex, very interesting conundrums to work through in a field like that, as opposed to are you really pulled by like the social justice aspects of it, working for First Nations or poverty law groups, that sort of thing, non-governmental organizations and not for profits. Like there's different ways. And then what does that look like? I think anybody who's looking at law as a possible career would be well served to think about, because the study of a particular aspect of law is going to be different than the practice of it and the lifestyle that comes along with the practice of it. So at least having an eye to that and at least being aware that, just because I love the criminal law and I love to study it doesn't mean I want to be a prosecutor or doesn't mean I want to defend accused criminals. It doesn't, right? They don't necessarily equate or correlate. So I think that's it. Having an eye to that, sort of always monitoring for yourself, like what would this look like, or is there a way to find out what this looks like in practice? Because it's one thing to be fascinated by the subject matter. And maybe if you're really just fascinated by subject matter, like there's people who go and take a master's in law or PhD in law, become professors and authors, and that's great too, right? It's like maybe if that's what drives you is simply the subject matter and like hooey with all the rest of this like practical stuff. There's a space for that too. So yeah, it kind of just depends. It really depends on the person, I think, and their personality and their desires and what makes them tick.
Well, I have this last question within this Q&A discovery here, and this one's a bit more reflective. Again, we've spoken to this point already in terms of your career and what it's represented and what you've been part of. Now, I'd like to ask, like, to this point, or maybe even projecting into the future, like, what has all of this added up to in your mind in terms of fulfillment, in terms of reward, in terms of, making sense of it all?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't ever considered that. I have sometimes especially when you're toiling away and it's the wee hours and you've been, You haven't had a weekend off in 3 or 4 weekends, and you kind of do sometimes sit back and go like, what am I doing this all for? And of course, like we talked about already, there's sort of a time and a place for, times to sort of push and persevere through. But in the grand scheme, I think for me, it's that I am making a difference in some measure. So in some advising corporations, I was advising them in my sort of mind to act reasonably and to do the reasonable, lawful, sensible thing, as opposed to be, I'm going to advise you to be bad corporate citizens and to take advantage of everybody. So for me, part of it is knowing that I bring that, I guess, that balance or that perspective, so that when I'm advising clients, whoever they may be, whether it's a ministry of government or like I say, a small business, a big business, what their obligations are, how to act lawfully, and that sort of has an innate value, I suppose, in society that the laws that we have are a big old complex set of rules that we've all agreed to, essentially abide by and decided that this is how we will function best as a collective. And that if everyone is doing their part and not trying to cut corners or break the rules, then we are going to function better as a society. And by the same token, there's different ways that I've begun to think about it in more recent years. Partly it's like in terms of fulfillment, partly it is personal accomplishment. Like there are times when, like winning a difficult case feels great. Like it's unlike anything else when you're like, I can't believe we actually won. I worked so hard on that. It was so challenging. There were so many obstacles. I thought for sure we were going to lose at this point. I thought for sure this was going to happen. And then, there's those feelings of success and triumph and achievement. And then more recently for me, it's become, and this really I think could go for any professional, but I think particularly, at least for me as a female lawyer, the fact that I am out there in the world doing a quote unquote, important job and having an impact, and that my daughter gets to see that. And that my only role of one of my most important role is as a mom, but it's not my only role. It's not my only purpose in this life. And I can go and have a significant impact and be a leader and be respected and, earn an income and do all those things, hopefully to show her that she can also do like whatever she wants. It doesn't have to be that. Could be something completely different, but that this is one of the things that's open to you, right? Like it's you get to have choices and options, and you can pursue different tracks, and you can change tracks at different times. All these things should be open to all of us. Yeah.
I love that, in terms of the professional side, but then also how you just sort of melded in the personal on that as well, and how they intersect and how they intertwine. And I think that's a big part of career fulfillment, career reflection, all of these things, kind of come together, when you are considering these things. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
For sure, for sure. And it's sort of things that you can't help but confront when you become a mother, I think too, because you get this extra layer of guilt. Like my kid's in daycare. I'm not with her all the time. I'm going off and working this job. Is this good? Who is this good for? Is this the right thing to do? And so I felt very confident that this actually was the right thing for her and I, and that I would be a better mother and a better role model for her if she saw me out, doing these other things and participating in society in that way. And it's not the same for everyone. So there's zero judgment on if somebody decides that being a stay-at-home mom is for them. That's great too. But yeah, I sort of can't help but creep in once kids enter the picture.
Okay. Well, maybe you could slide into this other segment, a water cooler story segment. And here I just ask, guests to indulge listeners with a story related to their work. So I'm really keen to hear what you have for us today, Kat.
So I was thinking about this because so much of the practice of law is actually so much more mundane than people, see on the TV, the dramatized versions of it. Like it's really not Law and Order most of the time. It's not Suits most of the time. We have glimpses of that, but like I say, every so often you do get those days or those moments where you're like, oh wow, am I living in a TV legal drama right now? And one of those moments for me was a file that I was working on. This was about 4 or 5 years ago now, and it was a large like commercial arbitration file. So we weren't in front of judges, but we had a panel of 3 expert arbitrators, and it was 2 companies who were fighting sort of like bet the farm kind of litigation. Like it was going to make or break at least one of these companies, probably whether they won or lost. So very, very high stakes for the clients, high pressure. And we were in the middle of the arbitration. So we were doing cross examinations of all the witnesses. And as we would do, we would prep our cross examination questions. We would send them to our clients to have a look at because they, you know, with every litigation file, like I get to learn about new and different things. I learn about sponsorship disputes for like sports franchises. I learn about construction projects. I learn about rail and like shipping coal, like different things. So you need your client to be like, take a look at this before. Like we're the lawyers, but like you know the subject matter. So here's the questions. Take a look. Let us know what you think. So one of my colleagues had finished a set of cross-examination questions for a witness that like a pretty important, pretty big witness in this case, had flipped them to the client, and the client, without really thinking or without realizing he had done it, because they were still in the process of this construction project, flipped it to the other guy, the guy who was going to be cross-examined.
Ooh.
And so all of a sudden we got this call from the client and things got very tense very quickly. And it was like, oh no, like he's got the question. He now has our roadmap. He now
Yeah.
has the
Yeah.
script. Like, so it was a situation I think that none of us had encountered before. We had to do we had a very somber walk back to the office. We were out at a team lunch because we were sort of working around the clock. So we were at a team lunch when it happened. And then it was like, okay, like we got to get back to the office and figure out what to do. So then it was sort of a case of really, working on the fly to figure out how do we handle this now? What do we do? How do we minimize the damage? And so there was a lot of kind of stick handling in terms of adjusting the questions and taking out things that we thought maybe would be zingers. Because if the person knows they're asking it, it's not going to be much of a zinger if they know it's coming. So adjusting things like that, and it all worked out fine in the end. But it was a incredibly unique and rather stressful experience when it happened.
It sounds like it. Yeah. Yeah. It sort of reflects, what we're leading off on in terms of what the profession sort of like presents as, law and order suits, whatever it might be. Yeah. I could see how that could probably be worked into a script somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And how really I've only got, a handful of those types of stories after 18 years of practice. So that tells you how representative the TV version of things is.
Yeah. Yeah. We do have one last segment here, a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And, clearly the day and age we're living in within right now, tech is dominating in a lot of respects, and it's flipping industries around and reestablishing boundaries and lines and whatnot. And I'm sure law, is grappling with a lot of the challenges that tech is presenting. I think probably safe to say that the velocity at which technology is evolving and changing, probably law is struggling to keep up with that. And what I'd love to know is like how you and your peers are handling some of those challenges that technology is presenting in that sense.
You're bang on. Like it's an issue, I think, for everybody. And law, I think law has always sort of lagged in the sense that law is sort of always trying to catch up to what's happening in society. So there's societal changes, and then the law catches up to go, okay, that wasn't really reflective of, that was reflective of the old way we did things. This is now how we do things. This is human rights law, and all those kinds of things are examples of that. And so technological changes are another example of that. And frankly, the law's not, it's doing an okay job, but not great at keeping up. It's very challenging to regulate industries that don't necessarily have a home jurisdiction. And like what court? So I have a file I'm working on right now where the company is, an online company of sorts, and they're arguing that the courts of British Columbia don't have jurisdiction over them because they don't have a physical home office here. And we're going, well, if that's the case, then no court has jurisdiction over you because you don't have a physical office anywhere. So there's things like that come up, and it's like, okay, these are still issues. Like there's still lots of those types of things that crop up, notwithstanding that, online business has been a thing for decades now. So those things still do present themselves. And then there's also the issue that we see starting to come in, which is we get told, probably like everyone does, that AI is going to steal our jobs. And it's hard to know if that's true or how much. There was a news story recently in British Columbia, a lawyer in Vancouver who quite unfortunately relied on Chat GPT to do some of her legal research. And the results of her legal research were fake cases that she was about to put before the court unknowingly. And so some of those foibles and like the shortcuts and the ways that we sort of all get used to using technology and the pitfalls that can come along with that. So yeah, those are just a couple examples of the way I see technology kind of impacting things, and whether or not law can keep up, I don't know.
Yeah, I can see it presenting as a couple ways. One, like in a confounding sense, like how do you interpret this? How do you manage its situation? But then also at the same
Mhm.
time, a degree of excitement because it does present this new variable, and it's also adding a different layer of something that's unexpected, which again, variety, we spoke about this earlier, it's going to add a different, sense of satisfaction and reward ultimately. And certainly some stress as well, but that sort of ties into the satisfaction element, I would think.
For sure. And there's sort of for every aspect of life or society, there's an aspect of law. There's, an area of law. So there's tech lawyers out there who are working with clients who are on the cutting edge of new technologies and helping them to license them and patent them. And like that's a whole field of law into itself that is, I think, quite exciting. It wasn't my bailiwick, but I certainly had friends who were in that line of work. And there's some pretty neat stuff going on over there. And they're yeah, getting to sort of see these things right as they're emerging, these emerging technologies, and seeing how these things might change the world that we're living in. So, yeah, totally.
Well, I can't believe that we're approaching an hour in this conversation. It feels like we just got started, but I've enjoyed it immensely. And I know listeners are really, really going to, take all of this in. I think find terrific insights from start to finish. And I can't thank you enough for all your time. It's been a true pleasure.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me on.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Katherine and her work, you can do so via LinkedIn. And for reference, I will have a link for that to be checked out in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. To show further support, you can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And lastly, head on over to YouTube. I do have that channel over there where you can catch highlights from the audio conversations. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.